Please don't make this emotional, Margaret. Mark and I need the real bedroom now. You'll be more comfortable in the sewing room anyway. That was the first thing my daughter-in-law said to me when I walked in the door on a Sunday afternoon, still holding the church bulletin folded inside my glove. "Mum, it's just a room," my son added, not even looking up from the box he was carrying. "You're one person." I stood in the hallway of the house I had lived in for 41 years, and I looked past both of them at the open door of my bedroom. Harold's nightstand was already out in the hall, shoved crooked against the wall like something waiting for the trash. My wedding photo lay face down in a laundry basket, and through the doorway I could see their headboard, their dresser, their whole life, arranged where mine had been that morning when I left for the 8 o'clock service. My name is Margaret Whitaker. I am 72 years old. I was married to Harold Whitaker for 42 years, and he built a good part of the life inside that house with his own hands, before a stroke took him from me 2 winters ago. Harold was a county building inspector. For 30 years, his whole working life was walking into other people's houses and asking one question: is this built on something that will hold? He measured foundations. He checked what was carrying the weight. He signed his name to say whether a thing was safe for a family to stand in. I mention that now because it matters later. Mark is my son. He is 46. His contracting business had failed that spring, and when he asked if his family could stay with me just for a little while, "Mum, just until we're back on our feet," I did not hesitate. I gave them the 2 guest rooms. I cooked. I covered the utilities. I told myself the coldness I felt from them was only the shame of a grown man who did not want to need his mother. I kept telling myself that for a long time. I set the bulletin down on the entry table. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I looked at Lauren, and then I looked at my son. "No," I said. "It was never just a room." Then I noticed the cedar box. Harold's cedar box, the one he made himself in the year we married, was sitting on the floor of the hallway with a yellow sticky note pressed to the lid. In Lauren's neat handwriting it said, "Old stuff, sort later." I did not say anything about the box. I picked up my purse from where I had set it, and I felt the weight of the folder inside it settle against my hip. Papers. I had driven across town to collect from my attorney's office that very morning, before church, when the two of them believed I was only praying. Wait, I could see them both thinking, why isn't she crying? I went into the kitchen and put the kettle on. Some decisions should not be made standing up in a hallway. Some decisions deserve a table. I want to tell you I was shocked. I was not. Shock is for things you did not see coming, and I had been watching this arrive for months, the way you watch a storm cloud cross a field long before it ever reaches your porch. There had been 3 moments. I know now they were never separate at all. The first was small. A Tuesday. I came downstairs to make my morning coffee and found my whole kitchen rearranged. Lauren had moved the mugs, the flour tin, Harold's old percolator, all of it, into places that made sense to her, and to no one who had cooked in that room for 4 decades. When I asked gently if she could put the percolator back where I could reach it, she smiled and said, "This house really needs younger energy, Margaret. You'll get used to it." I told myself she was only nesting. She was under stress. "They mean well," I said, out loud, to the empty kitchen. The second was money, the way it usually is. Mark started leaving certain bills on the counter near my reading glasses. The electric, the water, never a word, just the envelope, placed where I would be sure to see it, the way you leave a note for someone whose job it is to handle a thing. I paid them. I told myself he was proud, that asking outright would have humiliated him. "He's grieving the business," I said. "He would not let this go too far." The third crossed a line. I could not explain away, though Lord knows I tried. Mark began asking about the deed. Not once. Again and again, always folded inside concern. "Have you thought about simplifying things, Mom? For when it all gets to be too much, it'd take the stress right off you." And Lauren, one evening at supper, setting down the serving spoon with a little click. We just think about the future. That's all. A house like this really ought to have a family growing in it. A family. As though I were not one. As though the 41 years of family already soaked into those walls had simply expired. I sat there and I buttered my roll and I said nothing, and I hated myself a little for the silence. Maybe I'm being sensitive, I thought. Families are complicated. But that night, I got out the small notebook I keep in my handbag, the one I used to use for grocery lists, and I wrote down the date and the word deed and nothing else. I did not know yet that I was starting a record. By the time I saw that yellow sticky note on Harold's cedar box, I understood. Those 3 moments had not been separate incidents. They had been practice. They had been 3 people learning, one polite comment at a time, exactly how far a quiet woman would let herself be moved. Let me take you back 3 weeks, because that is when the practice hardened into a plan, and the plan was not mine. It was a Thursday afternoon. I had gone up to lie down, which I do not usually do, and the house was quiet in the way that carries sound instead of holding it. Through the iron floor vent in my bedroom, the one Harold always meant to have sealed, and never did I could hear, Mark and Lauren in the kitchen below. I heard the clink of a spoon against a mug. I heard Lauren laugh at something, and then I heard my son's voice say a thing I have not been able to unhear since. She's not going to be here forever, Lauren. And when she's not, this is basically ours anyway. We might as well start living like it. Basically ours anyway. I lay very still on the bed my husband died in. Harold's reading glasses were still folded on the nightstand where he left them. The afternoon light came through the curtains, the way it had for 41 years. And below me, through a vent an old inspector never got around to fixing, I listened to my only son measure me out of my own life in a single sentence. As calmly as a man reading a weather report. I did not move for a long time. The next morning, I called Harold's attorney. Not a stranger, not a name from a billboard, but Raymond Alvarez, the man who had drawn up our trust years before, back when Harold was still alive and still worrying quietly at the edges of things. I told Raymond what I had heard through the floor. There was a pause on the line, the kind a careful professional takes before he says something true. Margaret, he said, before you decide anything, I'd like you to come in and let me show you exactly what you already have. I don't think you understand how much of this your husband already handled. Handled, I repeated. Harold came to see me about 18 months before he passed, Raymond said. He didn't know what would happen. He only told me he wanted to be sure you'd have choices. He asked me to keep the file ready. And, Margaret, there's a letter. He left it with the file and asked me to make sure it reached you if you ever came in worried. I was sitting at my kitchen table with the phone in one hand and my other hand flat on the wood, the way you steady yourself. On the table sat a chipped blue mug, the one Harold always used, that I had never once been able to put away. When can you see me? I asked. How is Sunday, before your service? I'll have everything laid out. I told him I would be there at 7. I did not know, that Friday, that while I sat in his conference room learning how defended I already was, Mark and Lauren would be at home loading their dresser into my bedroom, certain that a woman at church is a woman who cannot see. There may be more here than the house, Raymond added, almost as an afterthought. Something came across my desk this week I think you'll want to look at in person. He would not say what over the phone. But that was only half of what waited for me at his office. Raymond had a conference room with a long table and good north light, and he had laid the documents out in a careful row, the way a man sets a table for someone he respects. He did not rush. He did not treat me like a confused old woman who needed things made simple. He treated me like the owner I was. Before anything else, he said, let's start with the house. People assume a great deal about houses. Let's look at what's actually recorded. He slid the first paper toward me. The trust certification. The house is titled in your revocable living trust. You and Harold set it up together. You are the trustee. You are the sole decision-maker while you're living. Your son is not on the deed, Margaret. He is not a co-owner. There is no lien in his name, no recorded claim, nothing. Legally, he has exactly as much authority over this house as a man walking past it on the sidewalk. I read it myself. I always read everything myself. I put my finger under each line the way Harold used to when he was checking a permit. My name, sole trustee, no co-owner. He talks about it like it's already his, I said quietly. Talking is free, Raymond said. The record is not so generous. Then he laid down the second paper, and this is where my hand went still. It was the temporary family occupancy agreement, the one I had almost forgotten. When Mark's family moved in, Raymond had gently suggested we put the arrangement in writing, just so everyone's clear. Margaret, that's all, and Mark had signed it without reading a word, the way a proud man signs a thing he is embarrassed to be signing at all. This is the one that matters most today, Raymond said. Mark signed it. It states plainly that you remain the sole decision-maker for the home, that no private space may be reassigned or repurposed without your written permission, and that any serious violation of these terms ends their permission to occupy the home. I looked at my son's signature at the bottom, his own hand, the looping M he has written since he was a boy doing his homework at my kitchen table. He signed the paper, I said slowly. That says he can't do the thing he keeps trying to do. He signed it, Raymond agreed. He simply never read it. I wrote a line in my notebook that night that arrived in that room. A record does not argue, it waits. Now, Raymond said, here is what came across my desk this week. He set down a single sheet, and this one had nothing to do with anything I had signed. It was an inquiry, a written request for an informal property valuation on my address, submitted to a local realtor. My son's name was on it, my son's phone number. A house that was not his, quietly being weighed and measured by a stranger for a sale that was not mine. I read it twice. I felt the floor of my chest go very level, the way a room goes level when the arguing finally stops inside it. He hasn't listed anything, Raymond said carefully. He couldn't. He has no authority to. But he wanted to know what it was worth. The realtor's office recognized the address as one I'd handled and had the decency to flag it. So it was not only a bedroom. It had never been only a bedroom. While I was cooking their suppers and paying their electric and telling myself he would not let this go too far, my son had been finding out what my life would sell for. I set the paper down gently on top of the others. All right, I said, show me the rest. There was more, and each page lifted a weight I had not known I was carrying. You had asked me about your successor trustee, Raymond said. As it stands, Mark is named to take over the trust after you. Given everything you've told me, do you want to keep it that way? No, I said. It did not feel like revenge when I said it. It felt like accuracy. He had prepared an amendment. It removed Mark as successor trustee and named a neutral trust officer at the bank. Instead, a professional with no stake in my kitchen and no opinion about my bedroom. I read every word. Then I asked the question I always came back to. If someone tried to pressure me, I said, tried to push me into signing away the house while I was tired, or grieving, or afraid, what protects me? This does, Raymond said, touching the trust. And this, the amendment. And frankly, Margaret, your own clarity does. No one can sell what they do not own. No one inherits early from a woman who is still standing. I signed the amendment in my own hand. Then a revocation of an old financial power of attorney I had signed years back, naming Mark, in a softer season, when I believed handing him that authority was only good planning. I revoked it. Cleanly, notarized right there by Raymond's assistant, a young woman who did not pity me, who only pressed her seal into the page and said, "There you are, Mrs. Whitaker." There I was, And, last, Raymond set down a document he had already drafted days before at my request, in case I ever decided I needed it. A formal written notice, proper and lawful, ending Mark and Lauren's permission to occupy the home, to take effect on legal notice if they ever crossed the line the agreement drew. I did not sign that one in his office. I folded it into the folder, unsigned. I'll know, I told him, if the day comes I need it. I did not know that day was 4 hours away. There's one more thing, Raymond said, and he handed me a sealed envelope, soft at the corners from being kept, with Harold's handwriting across the front. I put the whole folder in my purse. I thanked him. I drove to church and I prayed, and I did not open the envelope yet. Some letters you do not read in a parked car. I read Harold's letter that night, alone, after the house had gone quiet, and Mark and Lauren had retreated behind the door of the bedroom that was still, in every way that a record can measure, mine. I sat at the kitchen table with the chipped blue mug, and I opened the envelope with a butter knife. Carefully. The way you open something you cannot replace. The paper was Harold's yellow legal pad, torn along the top. On the front of the envelope he had written the words that undid me before I read a single line inside. For Maggie, if they ever make you feel like a guest. He knew me, not the future, me. Maggie, the letter began. If you are reading this, then something has happened that I could not see clearly enough to name, and I am sorry I am not there to sit beside you while you work it out. I want to tell you first that I do not know what went wrong. I am not writing this because I predicted anything. I spent 30 years walking into houses and checking whether they were built on something solid, and I got good at noticing when a thing looked fine on the surface but was carrying its weight wrong underneath. I started noticing it in our own family. In the way, people began talking around you instead of to you. In the way plans got made near you but never with you. I couldn't prove a thing. I only worried. So I did the one thing an old inspector knows how to do. I made sure the foundation was sound. I made sure that whatever came, you would be standing on something that would hold. I did not decide anything for you, and I don't want to start now. Raymond has the papers. All they do is give you choices. You are the one who makes them. You always were the stronger of the two of us, Maggie, even when you let me believe otherwise so I could feel useful. Please don't confuse peace with surrender. They are not the same, though they can wear the same quiet face. Ask every question. Read every page. Sign only what gives you rest. You are not a guest in your own life. You never were. I love you. Check the weight-bearing wall before you trust the room. Harold. I cried then. I want to be honest about that, but I want to be just as honest that I did not cry the way a rescued woman cries. I cried. The way you cry when someone who loved you reaches across 2 years and the far side of death, only to set his hand on your shoulder and say, I see you, and you are not alone, and you already know what to do. He was not a prophet. He was a careful man who had loved me enough to leave the foundation sound. I dried my face with the dish towel by the sink. I put the letter back in its envelope, the envelope back in the folder back in my purse. Then I looked at Harold's cedar box, which I had carried in from the hallway and set back on the table where it belonged. The sticky note peeled off and thrown away. Old stuff, she had written. I lifted the lid. His watch inside, still keeping the wrong time. His funeral program. A stack of letters we had written each other across 42 years. And a small worn key, the one that had opened this house since long before either of these people were born. I closed the box gently, and I decided that in the morning I would set the table. They came down to breakfast the way people come down to a meal they believe they have already won. Lauren was brisk. Mark would not quite meet my eyes. Emily, my granddaughter, 15 and quiet, slid into her chair and watched all three of us, the way sensitive children watch a room they can feel but cannot yet name. I had made eggs. I had also, before anyone woke, laid the closed folder on the kitchen table beside my chipped blue mug. "Margaret," Lauren began, in the reasonable voice she saved for cruelty, "I hope you slept all right. I really do think once you settle into the sewing room you'll find it cozier, less to clean. It just makes sense for us to have the master, with our schedules and all." "We're not trying to upset you, Mom," Mark said. "We're being practical. You've got to admit the house is a lot for one person. We're only thinking about the future." "We honestly thought you'd be relieved," Lauren added, "that we're handling things for you." I let them finish. "I have learned that people will tell you their entire position if you simply decline to interrupt it." Then I set down my coffee, and I opened the folder. I did not raise my voice. I placed the papers on the table one at a time, turned so they could read them, exactly the way Raymond had placed them in front of me. "This is the trust certification," I said. "The house is in my trust. I am the sole owner. Mark, you are not on the deed. You never have been." Mark's jaw tightened. "Mom, come on. Nobody ever said—" "This," I said, laying down the second page, "is the occupancy agreement. You signed it, Mark, the week you moved in. It says the house is mine to decide about. It says no private space may be reassigned without my written permission. It says a serious violation ends your permission to stay." I watched my son read his own signature. I watched the color go out of his face as he understood, finally, that he had put his own hand to the very paper that undid him. Lauren reached for the page. "That can't be enforceable. We live here. We have a child. There are laws about—" "There are," I said calmly. "I've followed every one of them." I laid down the third page. "This is the amendment to my trust. It removes you, Mark, as the person who would have taken over after me. That job belongs to a professional at the bank now. The fourth. This revokes the financial authority I once gave you. You no longer speak for my money." And then I set down the last page, the valuation inquiry, my son's name at the top of it. "And this," I said quietly, "is what you asked a realtor to find out, what my house would sell for, while you were sleeping under its roof and letting me pay the light bill." Mark stared at the page. He did not deny it. There was nothing left to deny. "Mom," he said, finally, and his voice had gone thin. "You'd really put us out, over a bedroom?" And that was the moment Emily spoke. She had not said a word through any of it. But she set down her fork, and she looked at her father, and she said, in the smallest, steadiest voice, "Dad, you planned it for a week. I heard you and Mom. You said to do it Sunday so it'd already be done before Grandma got home from church." The kitchen went very still. Lauren turned to her daughter with a look, but the girl did not take it back. She only looked down at her plate, her ears red, having told the one true thing no adult in that room had been willing to say out loud. I let the silence hold. Then I gave my son the truth, calmly. "The way you hand someone something heavy." "You didn't move into my bedroom yesterday, Mark," I said. "You moved yourselves out of my house." Lauren started to say my name. I raised one hand, not sharply, just enough. "Lauren, you said the words. You told me not to make it emotional while you carried my marriage out into the hallway." I turned to my son. "But you, Mark, you called this house basically ours through a floor vent while I was lying above you. You had it appraised. She moved the furniture. You are the one who taught her she could." His mouth opened to apologize. I could see it forming, quick, cheap. The kind of apology that wants to end the discomfort in the room more than it wants to mean a thing. "No," I said gently. "Not yet. Some apologies need to be held a while before they can be answered." And I closed the folder, and I slid it back into my purse, and I stood, and I carried my cup to the sink. Behind me, no one said anything at all. The house they had been quietly selling in their heads had, without a single raised voice, come down. Emily found me in the garden 2 evenings later. I was on my knees at the border by the porch, working the dead heads off the marigolds, when I heard her come down the steps. She stood a moment, then knelt beside me in the dirt, without being asked, and began pulling weeds, her hands close to mine. We worked in silence for a while. Then she said, so quietly I almost lost it under the porch light coming on, "Grandma, I'm sorry. Not just for what I said at breakfast, for not saying it sooner. I heard them planning it, and I didn't know how to stop it, and I let it happen." Her voice caught. "You always kept my quilt on the swing so I'd have it when I read out here. And they moved you into the sewing room like you were nobody." I sat back on my heels and looked at her, this girl with her grandfather's serious eyes. "You said it when it counted," I told her. "You told the truth in a room full of grown people who wouldn't. That's a harder thing than you know." She helped me carry the trimmings to the bin. And then she said the thing that told me which grandchild she was. "Can you tell me about Grandpa's watch? The one in the box. Mom said it was old stuff, but it doesn't feel like old stuff." So I told her. About the watch, and the letters, and the man who spent his life checking whether things were built to hold. She listened the way you listen, when you're trying to keep something for a long time. She did not ask about the house. She did not ask about the trust, or the will, or where any of it would go. She asked about her grandfather. Before she went in, she folded the porch quilt that had slid off the swing, squared its corners the way I like them, and set it back without being told. A small thing. But I have learned to notice small things. They are usually practice for something, and I let myself believe this girl was practicing being the kind of person her grandfather had been. I did not pretend the last months had not happened. I love her, but love does not require me to hand my dignity back to the people who spent it. What I could do was keep one honest door open in a house of closed ones. So I told her she was welcome at my table any time she came as herself, and never as anyone's messenger. "I'd like that," she said. Hope, it turns out, is a quiet visitor too. They moved out within the month, on proper notice, lawfully, without a single dish thrown onto a lawn. I stopped paying their bills the day I opened the folder at the table. The bank removed Mark's name from the old authorizations. I changed my emergency contact at the doctor's office from my son to my neighbor Ruth, who has known me 30 years and has never once called my home, basically hers. After they were gone, and only then, I had the locks changed. And that same afternoon, I planted a row of white tulips along the front walk. I sold the big house the following spring, when I was ready, on my own timeline and no one else's. I moved into a bright, one-level cottage, 2 streets from my church, where every room belongs to me, and the afternoon light comes in low and gold. Harold's cedar box sits on a clean shelf where I can see it from my chair. I settled my estate the way I wanted it, not the way anyone had assumed. Part of it goes into a protected education fund for Emily, held by that neutral trustee, so that my love reaches her without passing through her parents' hands. Another part goes to the widow's housing program at church that Harold always cared about. Mark's name is not on the house, and it is not on the money. He is on my prayer list. That is a different kind of list. Mark sent a long letter some months on. Pages of it. I read every one, in my own kitchen, with my own coffee, and no one making me feel in the way. Then I folded it carefully and wrote him back, kindly and briefly. I did not perform a reconciliation to make the family comfortable. I chose peace over performance. I sit most evenings now on the front steps of the cottage, with the notebook that started as a grocery list and became something else. Tonight I wrote one line in it, in my own hand, the way I have signed everything that mattered this year. I was never the guest. I was the whole reason there was ever a home to be welcomed into. Sometimes dignity does not arrive with shouting. Across the walk, the white tulips have come up again, and the porch light is warm, and Harold's box sits on its shelf, keeping the wrong time perfectly. and the chair beside me is empty, but my life, at last, is not.